So yesterday there was a YouTuber named like Jimmy Bebop, I believe, or Jimmy Boy Bebop, and he did a video talking about the Death Riders and why it's not working. And the biggest thing that he said was continuity, and there's definitely like a lot of arguments for that. And definitely with the Death Riders, continuity is important. Like honestly, if John Moxley's supposed to be this threat, like he was suggesting that anybody he takes out is out of AEW for a couple of months. And then also there has to be a sense of raising the stakes, or the wrestlers who are in the Moxley faction, the Death Rider faction, they have to actually be having victories or winning championships. Or you could even have done something like made Claudio Castagnoli the Continental Champion. So I do want to talk about my side of things, like why I feel like the Death Riders are not working, and I do think it's kind of lengthy. But I think the first thing that I would say is ultimately they don't have a really good villain, and they don't have a good babyface. That, like I've said about John Moxley, that the thing about him is that I don't like his dialogue. Like he sounds like a poor man's Bray Wyatt, where like he speaks in a very abstract way. I think he was saying something like impregnable or impeachable. Like he was using the words that he's saying incorrectly. So it's just that thing too, that if you want to act really serious and tough, you have to kind of make sure people are getting what you're saying. There are certain wrestlers like Bray Wyatt or The Undertaker or Kane where they can speak in an abstract way because they're kind of like a mythical character, but that doesn't really work for John Moxley. And then the other thing about John Moxley is that I do think some of his ideas work and don't work. Like the whole entire like throwing chemical down people's throats and other things like that. To me that comes off as a little cartoony. Like I think that just having like these really hardcore, like beating the shit out of you type of matches is what's going to work with him. And then the other thing that I'll talk about is the Death Rider faction. Like I think they have all the members are good, but the only issue is Wheeler Yuta. Like Wheeler Useless, as we said, like he kind of looks like like a Napoleon Dynamite was Amish, or he kind of looks like an Amish person without a tan, really. Like really really big beard, really skinny body and stuff like that. Like honestly, I would switch him out with Ricky Starks. Or I would have something where you can turn like Big Cass or somebody else like heel and join the Death Riders and then get rid of Wheeler Yuta. And I think that would be good, really. The next things are the baby faces. That I think that you have a couple of problems. That first of all, you have Darby Allin. And what's Darby Allin doing right now? He's climbing Mount Everest. So honestly, if you're going to have a wrestler like him climb Mount Everest and do other shit like that, you would not even include him in any storyline. You would say something like, okay, he's taking a hiatus. Maybe after he lost the championship opportunity, no more Darby Allin until he comes back from Mount Everest. That's what you do. You don't do something like you make him matter, and now he's slowly kind of bowed out, really. He kind of bowed out at the wrong time. The next thing that I would say is that you had the Dark Order, you had Brandon Cutler, you had Orange Cassidy and a few other people who are not legitimate threats. Like I've kind of said that what would happen if it was the Hurt Syndicate, like they were hired, or what would happen if you turned the Don Callis family babyface, or what would happen if you had a good group of baby faces, like you had Swerve Strickland, Hangman Adam Page, you had Big Bill, he changes, Jay Lethal, Ricky Starks, Chris Statlander, Willow Nightingale. Like you had a group of them. Like you had people who are actually legitimate physical wrestlers. Like they look like they can kick your ass, and then they're also good on the microphone. Like those types of people. I think that that's also really lacking. The next thing that I would say is lacking as well is two big things. I think the first thing is there's no woman babyface. That honestly, like with Marina Shafir, who is she supposed to go against? Like I said, like when they had World's End, it should have been Marina Shafir versus Willow Nightingale. She could have easily beaten the shit out of Willow Nightingale, and then you had Marina Shafir versus Chris Statlander. Or you could have done something where you could have had Marina Shafir take the title away from Athena, or take the title away from take the title away from Mariah May, and you could have had her like kind of like hold that title really, and that would have been good really, because the Ring of Honor title doesn't matter if you're giving it to Athena for 2 years and other things like that. And then also, that's the other thing about it as well really, that you don't really have a good like female baby face in that storyline, so that's not good. I even said like Nyla Rose, because Nyla Rose has a good voice and she kind of has a formidable look, really. So I really think that, they have a lack of a female baby face in that group, really. The next thing that I want to add is that they don't have good young talents. That really, their only big young talents right now, in my opinion, is Kyle Fletcher, and the other one is Powerhouse Hobbs. Like, Powerhouse Hobbs looks legitimate. He's a badass. He can talk on the microphone. I do agree with a lot of people that, yes, I want to see him become the AEW champion. But the problem with Hobbs is he's been off television for a while. He was out on injury. And he's also been in bad booking. Like, he was the TNT champion a couple of times. He lost to Ricky Starks. I believe he lost to Orange Cassidy. So they kind of do that thing, too, of, okay, the big man has to lose to the small man. What would happen if you put him through obstacles? What would happen if he's not even had like a match, in my opinion, that's helped him out in a big way. Like, you've not seen Hobbs versus Lashley, Hobbs versus Samoa Joe, Hobbs versus Lance Archer, Hobbs versus Brian Cage, Hobbs versus Wardlow. You've not kind of seen him do anything. The only thing that he's done notable is Hobbs versus Fallah Bahh. He lifted a 400-pound Fallah Bahh. He lifted like the Big Show, so you need to kind of like have him in bigger spots, really. So he can be ready, but he's not in that spot yet, 100%. The next thing that I will say is that then you look at Kyle Fletcher. He is a heel right now, so you can't really take him out of that, but he's doing a hell of a job, really. And he could make a good AEW champion one day. Like, he kind of has all the intensity and violence, really, but there's really no other like babyface on the roster right now that like a young talent like Danny Garcia. He doesn't talk that much. He still does like the dick dancing. You have Daddy Magic. When he got beaten up by MJF, he kind of had a lot of emotion. Like, he kind of came off like a Joaquin Phoenix. So there's something in there. You have Ricky Starks, who's sitting at home. He can come back as a babyface. You have Sammy Guevara, who's doing a good job with Dustin, and that could lead to something. But there's just no really like babyface, young next generation type of person that can really take that spot, really. And that's also another issue, So they had to scrap together, and then they had to get people like Danny Garcia, who doesn't talk that much in the microphone. Private Party, who's lost a lot of matches, and now they're relevant. And then you also even have to say that one of your top babyfaces are the Costco guys, but there's no way in hell that they're going to have that. So that's also another problem. And I also think another problem are the veterans, Like, I think, for example, like, Jeff Jarrett is doing a storyline with MJF, So, honestly, that's beneath MJF. And then also, we don't want to see Jeff Jarrett go after the title. We see Christian Cage. And the way that I feel it's going to happen is either Luchasaurus or Hook is going to screw over Christian Cage. And then if you take the title off of Moxley and give it to Adam Copeland, then you're going to have Christian take that away. So it's going to create a clusterfuck. And then Adam Copeland is too old. And then the other issue is then you have Bryan Danielson, who can come out of retirement. And then you can also have Kenny Omega, who doesn't have that many years left, really. And then you also have, Then also you have Chris Jericho, who's with the ROH title. So, you don't really have like a good veteran, or you have like veterans that are kind of in it for themselves. And I've said stuff about Dustin Rhodes, but he's holding two like tag team titles right now. So you can't really make him the AEW champion. And then other people are gonna say, oh, that's a Cody Rhodes ripoff type of thing, really. So you really don't even have that like veteran wrestler, unless you kind of create a faction and you make it FTR, Adam Copeland, Powerhouse Hobbs, and then you bring in, a female wrestler into that. So that's also another big hit. And I also think that the other big issue is Tony Khan for a couple of things. I think that the first thing that I would say is that, Kenny Omega could be the person taking down the Death Riders. And like I've said before, that the Wrestle Dynasty show did a couple of bad things. That first of all, Kenny Omega came back at Wrestle Dynasty to have his first match when it should have been in AEW, or it should have been like maybe Claudio versus Kenny Omega or something like that. And then the next thing is that a lot of the people on the World's End card did not give up their titles because they wanted to hold a championship at Wrestle Dynasty. So they threw the pay-per-view under the bus. And then the other thing is that maybe there's backstage favors. You have Jeff Jarrett wanting to be the AEW champion. You have Christian that may have said, okay, I have the contract, so I got to be a champion. Then you may have people like Adam Copeland changing his name to Cope. Like Cope beats Moxley. That's not a good thing. And then you also have situations like I've seen it before. Like you kind of have Jungle Boy Jack Perry who, during the CM Punk debacle, one of the things was that he wanted to go home for a couple months. You have some wrestlers who were like, you know what, I've been on television a couple of months. I don't want to stay for the storyline. You have people like Darby Allin, who should not be climbing Mount Everest. He should be in the storyline. You have people like MJF, who's off in Hollywood, so he doesn't really know how to manage his people. And then also you kind of learn what he said about what happened with the EVPs taking over AEW, where Tony Khan got rid of that storyline because he did not like them having power on his television show. He wanted to kind of like be like, hold all the power really, or be the big power figure. So there's also just Tony not having a great direction. And then also he said that he has 30 people in his creative cabinet. And then the problem with that is that that's always going to lead to a bad script because, 30 people, you may have a situation where everybody says that the rule is everybody gets one thing that they want, really. And when it's 30 different people, that's not good. And then the other thing, too, is that you have to kind of say this is what I would do. 10 people for Dynamite, 10 people for Collision, 10 people for Ring of Honor, and then 15 people for pay-per-views, including Tony, So that's how I would do it. And then I also think that the other big issue is a lack of emphasis on Ring of Honor and Collision. That, this storyline is really on Dynamite, but you have to make Collision matter, and then you also have to make, Ring of Honor matter. Like what would happen, like I said, that you have Big Bill being like, okay, I see bigger opportunities, so I'm going to take out Chris Jericho, and then you have him be the Ring of Honor champion, and then he joins the, and then he does join the Death Riders. Or what would happen if, on Collision, you almost had like a wrestler do double duty, you had the Ring of Honor champion be on both shows, really. Or what would happen if you did something like, you had like a lot of the Collision show end with the Death Riders main eventing the show. So you had Maria Shavir main event one night. You had another week you have it with Claudio or other people. So there's a lot of just things that you can kind of do, really. And I just think that those are really like all the big talking points. I would also kind of say that another big talking point is Orange Cassidy. That I've kind of said this many, many times that he's not the right champion. He should be fired from AEW because he's not contributing to any value. And I think that what some people say about him is that there's stories of him backstage that when people tell him not to do the comedy kicks, he does the comedy kicks. And then also when you look at the build, he was saying something like, I'm going to take your championship and I'm going to put it in my backpack. So he also has that issue too of he does not know how to turn off the comedy, and that's not helping anybody. Like again, if you're fighting somebody like John Moxley, here's a guy who's trying to take over the company. Here's a guy who's trying to poison people. Here's a guy who beat the shit out of Bryan Danielson and nearly murdered him, and you're responding with hands in your pocket and doing the stupid comedy kicks. That's just not, going to help anybody. And I also think that the other thing that I would say about it is also Darby Allin. That he's also been another big detriment. That, the problem is that he's too much of a daredevil. And I said, like, there's things that work and there's things that don't work. I think at the end of the year, what they should have done was they should have had Moxley versus, they should have had Bryan Danielson versus Darby. Then at Full Gear, you do something where it's maybe Darby versus, like, Hangman Adam Page. And then you should have done like Darby versus Moxley at Wrestle Dream. I'm no at World's End, and then you do the Moxley faction thing for the next couple of months. Really, that's how they should have done that, and I think that would have been a stronger thing. So they used Darby Allin poorly. The other thing about Darby Allin is that like I said, it takes time to climb off Mount Everest. So what happens if he injures himself or gets killed? Or another thing is that you kind of look at what happened when with all the dangerous stunts that he does, like what happened with like at Full Gear when he crashed Moxley's car. Like I think like he wasn't supposed to do it at such a high speed, but he decided to do that, and he's all like slurring and just a little disoriented. So you can't have that person be a champion, because what happens is two things. You may have a kid who's a dipshit who imitates Darby Allin, and then you may have another situation where you have Darby Allin, and what happens is that he gets paralyzed or injured, and then that's the end of it. He becomes just like Draws, or he becomes just like another wrestler like Rick Rude, or somebody who has to retire early. Or I believe his name was Wife Beater in Combat Zone Wrestling, where he hurt his spine really badly and he couldn't like wrestle that much longer. And that's a bad look, and that's somebody in the championship picture. And then the other bad thing about it is that he was wrestling with Sting. He had the retirement match. It would have been a good full circle if he actually came back and he actually, got the title by the end of 2024. I think that would have done a lot of great things. And I also want to talk a little bit about the Holy Trinity: Swerve, Hangman, and Ospreay. That, like I said about Ospreay has great matches, but he's kind of been more like the Dave Meltzer type of matches. So, Ospreay can definitely be the champion, and that might be the right push. That might be the right thing for him, is that if he has this really bloody, crazy match with Jon Moxley, but they're not putting Ospreay in the main event picture. Like, they put him in the Continental Classic and other things like that, really. So he's not where he should be. The next person is Swerve. That, Swerve is kind of in limbo now. Like, it's him and Ricochet. So he's kind of enhancing the younger talent, or he's enhancing the other talents, which is a good spot for him. But the problem is that, he's also kind of like a big baby face. So him and Moxley should be a really great match, and that's not happening. And then the other thing is Hangman Adam Page. Like him and Jay White. He lost to Jay White, and Adam Page kind of like this, psycho, or you don't know what he's going to do. Or he may be like, what? I just want to pick a fight with everybody. Like, he and Moxley would be a really great match, but he's been downgraded a lot, really. So, like people have said in other videos that the de-emphasis video, that you have Moxley, you have Ospreay, Swerve, and Hangman, who are really like your next generation, who are really the people that draw, and you actually do not put them in bigger and better spots, really. So I really think that that's really a huge problem in AEW, is that they're not in the right spots. You're not using people correctly, and that's not good, really. And I've talked about continuity, and I also will talk lastly about credibility. And I think that should be for another